Are narcissists made, or do they come into the world that way? This is a question that I get a lot from people. Like, what makes a narcissist a narcissist? And in this video, I'm going to try to tackle this. I'm going to be talking about some of the factors that we know may be contributing to narcissistic tendencies and to the disorder itself. I'm also going to tell you my own personal viewpoints from working with people who have been through narcissistic abuse, having been through it myself, also from a more transpersonal point of view that is holistic. So I'll give you that information as well. So please stay to the end where I'm going to give you some resources that can really help you, especially if you are the adult child of a narcissist, an ACON as I call us. I'm Dr. Meg Haworth, and I help survivors of parental narcissistic abuse, ACONs, as I call them, adult children of narcissists, become icons. What's an icon? An icon is someone who's independent, confident, original, and naturally you. So becoming the icon in your own life and feeling healed and going through that process of healing, which I always say is an ongoing process, is something that's really important to do if you are the adult child of a narcissist. So if you haven't already done so, please like this video. Please give me a little love so I can continue making more videos and so that it can get out to more people, and also subscribe if you haven't done so already. Okay, so let's get to our narcissists made. And the research shows that yes, narcissists are made, but there's wiggle room in that, of course. So I think it's a multi-layered question, or the answering of it is multi-layered. It's not that simple. One of the primary things that we see is connected to narcissism is trauma. And a lot of people, when they hear the word trauma, they think that means something horrible. You know, like your parents were killed in a car crash, or you were sexually abused multiple times, or even just once. Or, you know, trauma can be, it's whatever it is the person views trauma as. So if the person views their parents' divorce as a trauma, like that splitting up of the home, the splitting up of the parents, that is very traumatic for many children. That could be enough to have them go into this narcissistic pattern. This narcissistic decision is kind of what I call it, but I'll get to that a little bit later. So trauma, abuse, neglect, and spoiling, over coddling the child is something that can also lead to narcissistic tendencies and to narcissistic disorder. You know, it depends on what that person goes through. Another big area that's really important to look at is what personality did the child come into the world with? You know, children that have more difficult personalities, that are more difficult to deal with, that, you know, don't listen to things that will help them be safe, you know, when parents who have a very hard time managing that can really, will say to you, you know, like, my child came into the world this way. They were always like this. And so there is that. And that's something that, you know, we hear a lot about in holistic communities and metaphysical communities and spiritual communities that will be talking about, you know, you came into this world to experience these things, to have this kind of personality, to have this kind of experience. And that may well be, it's hard to really know. But what we do know about human life and how narcissists are developed is we do know that there is a major association with trauma. Neglect is a big one. And so if a parent is being very neglectful of the child's emotional state and neglectful of what's important to the child and not really bringing out and nurturing the best parts of that child, and they are instead using material goods, externalism, external things. So they're showing the child that externals are more important than the internals. So they're training the child to basically look at the external world and look at stuff and money, and those things will make you happy. But we all know those things do not make you happy. They can make you feel a little better for a little bit, but they will not bring you overall happiness over time. So instead of nurturing that internal world of the child, they're nurturing an external one. So they're giving them all the stuff. And a lot of parents do that too, because they don't want to deal with their own emotional stuff that comes up that may be triggered by their children, especially when their children get to the age that they were when something traumatic happened to them, and things get triggered in the parent. So the parent may be saying, here, go play with your video games. Here you go. And the kid's like, yeah, this is really cool. But they're not learning any kind of skills of really working through emotional experience, really working through things with parents. And honestly, most people don't have these skills. I think we're in a time frame in our world where people are gaining these skills. And I think it's a very important time frame that we are in, where people are learning more about, like, how do we treat each other, and how much of this is unconscious, and how much of this can we change and bring to the conscious mind and change. And that's one of the key differences with the narcissist, is that they will not look at themselves. It's almost like their perception is, it won't allow them to do that, because the pain is so intense and the false self that they have created is so real to them. They've made it so real to them, this grandiose sense of self that isn't really what they're actually feeling. The foundation of narcissism is insecurity. And so parents who foster insecurity in their children in many different ways, never letting them have their own emotions, never showing the children empathy. The child starts crying and it's just like, would you stop? Would you stop? Would you be quiet? Would you, instead of like, hey, what's going on, hon? What's the matter? Letting the child say, this awful thing's happening. To the adult, you're like, it's not that awful, but to the child it is. And so, letting the child experience their own emotions, and then helping them with empathy, saying, oh, wow, that must be really hard, and helping them through that experience. But most people do not have these skills, and so they keep perpetuating these cycles. And this leads me to another reason why children may grow up to be narcissists, or may become narcissists, because we know narcissism is like a stunted emotional development. So you will even say about if you have a narcissistic parent or a mate or a friend, you will say, when they throw their emotional tantrums, when they throw their fits, you will say they were like a 50-year-old toddler. They're just freaking out on you. And because they're not getting their way. They were so accustomed to getting their way that they believe that they should get their way all the time. So that's one of the carryovers. What I was about to say is that one of the places where they learn narcissism and narcissistic traits is through parents who are narcissistic. So they start modeling those behaviors of parents with the disorder. So they start doing the same kind of things. Now, the difference between somebody who maybe is modeling a narcissistic behavior and is actually repeating narcissism and is actually narcissistic themselves is that the person who is modeling the behavior and like repeating a behavior and sees themselves and says, whoa, wait a minute, I'm repeating that behavior. I can't believe I'm doing that. And then changes that. That's somebody who is reflective, self-reflective. That's somebody who is interested in their own personal inner world and their own personal development. And so, but a narcissist will not be able to do that. And that's a primary way that you can tell whether the person actually has the disorder. They will not, absolutely will not touch their shame. It's a shame-driven disorder. And anytime that shame gets touched, it's just spewed out on everyone else around them. And so, if you grow up with a parent like this, you become, especially if you're empathic and sensitive, you become like a shame sponge where you're just taking it all in. So there are many reasons why. So it's the family reason, it comes down through the family line. It comes down through the way people think and perceptions that they adopt through experiences, the thoughts, the feelings, the beliefs of the ancestors, the way they treat their children. And putting them into those various roles that narcissistic parents put their children into, like the golden child and the scapegoat and the invisible child and the enabler, and all of those different roles that the narcissistic parent puts them into. So that cycle can be repeated generation after generation after generation. So there's that going on, but then there's also the abuse and neglect piece. So severe traumas too, like sexual abuse, can lead to narcissism. And so here I'm going to tell you what I see or what I think this is. I think that narcissism is actually a decision that that child makes in a time of trauma or repeated trauma, or it doesn't even have to be in a specific moment, but they make a decision, usually really young, that they're not going to let love in and they're not going to let love out. And so it's a way of cutting themselves off from the pain that they're in, from the serious pain that they're in, from the shame of something that happened, the shame of being shamed constantly by their own parent, the shame of being sexually abused as a child, the shame of being physically abused as a child. And so I think they kind of make this decision that, nope, not going to let this, anytime this gets touched, it's not me. So they create this fantasy person that isn't really them. And they watch other people to do it. So they're mirroring other people, trying to be like them. And so they create this really false self, this grandiose sense of self that isn't really them. Now, most narcissists are not grandiose. Most of them are covert. And so it's more hidden. And so they'll use other people, they'll use situations to show their victimization and be a sort of that poor me person that keeps saying, this does not mean that everybody who goes to poor me and is victimized is a narcissist. So please know that. Also, I think it's really important for you to understand that I'm not making this video so that you can look at that and go, oh, I feel so much compassion for my narcissistic parent now because of what they must have been through. And great, feel compassion, that's great. But do not continue to allow them to abuse you, because now you're aware of, wow, something awful happened to them. It's not a reason. Nothing's a reason to allow somebody to continue to abuse you and make you feel worthless and like nothing and like you don't matter and all of those things. So again, the subject is pretty complicated and there are many different reasons, and I'm sure they'll be coming up with more and more in the research that they're doing on narcissism, because there's a lot of it. There's a lot of conversations in the cultural conversation about narcissism these days. A lot of videos. I have a ton of my own videos that I've been making about narcissism. But what I offer, though, are things that help you with your holistic healing around narcissism, especially if you had an emotionally abusive parent. It may have been emotional, physical, sexual abuse, all of those things I went through and I help other people with as well. And you may have had all of those things combined from different people in your life when you were a child. And healing those are going to be incredibly important. And it's why I created my online course, Healing the 5 Primary Wounds of Parental Narcissistic Abuse. People ask me all the time, like, well, my spouse is a narcissist or my boyfriend is, is that course going to help me? Yes. If you, especially if you have been with a narcissistic spouse for the long haul and you have kids together, all of these things like your self-worth, your identity, your self-expression, your self-trust, your physical body, all of those things are going to get worn down, and all of those things are addressed in the course. Those are those 5 primary wounds of narcissistic abuse. And I do energy exercises that help you to release the emotional energy that you're holding in your body. So it's holistic in that we work with the mental, the emotional, the energetic and spiritual and physical. And by working with that emotional energy and how the body holds it and how you're being drained over time by the experience of narcissistic abuse, of being literally, you're like whittled away at. You'll say the life is sucked out of me by this narcissist. I feel so drained when I'm around them. They are very draining people. They're not managing their own emotions. They're not managing their own lives. They don't have an inner life. They won't allow themselves to have an inner life. So they're always like, I'm so bored. They're always looking for something external to try to make them feel better, whether that be alcohol or sex or objectifying other people or, it's kind of endless what happens with the narcissist, but they're very specific traits that they have. And you may recognize yourself as having some of these as well. But again, here's a primary difference is if you are introspective and you're willing to look at your own patterning and you're willing to shift and change that, then that's great. That's a really good indicator that you may be narcissistic, but not a narcissist, because there's definitely a difference between those two things. And it's important to determine where you lie on that spectrum, especially if you had a narcissistic parent. So this video has gotten longer than I thought it was going to get, but yeah, I wanted to really address this question a little bit more deeply than, the 5 minutes I get in conversation when friends will say to me like, so are narcissists made? And I think they may be. Yes, there is the making of, there's the programming from narcissistic parents, from parents that are just authoritarian and overbearing helicopter parents. There's those things that are going on. There's also the emotional neglect and the abuse, and trauma and all those things that could be factoring in. At any rate, I hope that this video has been really helpful to you. And if you haven't already done so, check the links below and look for 52 ways to tell if your parent is a narcissist free checklist. There's tons of other videos here on my channel that you can watch and learn from if you're trying to determine, like, was my parent a narcissist? If you identify with the things I talked about today in the video, and you want extra help and this online course that you can use over and over and over again, to help you with the energetics of narcissism, the holistic perspective of helping you to release the narcissistic drains on your own mental, emotional, physical, then go check out my course. The links are also in below. The course is called Healing the 5 Primary Wounds of Parental Narcissistic Abuse. And if you want to work with me one-on-one, then you can book a free call with me. The links are also below in the description and in the comments, so you can book a free call with me. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope this information will help you get well now.